new to this, 4 months, and slow start. Involved with too many nonprofits.
You guys are all good.
Thank you, Anthony.
But also, it's a way of networking.
It is.
So,
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I see some new faces. You've been to my economic updates before, my friend. And who has not? No one? Good, because some of it's going to be repetitive. Because I have some messages that I'm really trying to drill home. And it'll be good because some of you haven't heard it before. So I won't be repeating myself too terribly badly. And there's still some new content too. Tammy? So hopefully this is enough to keep everybody excited on the edge of their seats. But the first thing I will do is I'll just sort of dispel or sort of give you my forecast for the spring market.
Crystal ball.
Yes. I have a degree of certainty that we're going to have a good spring market. After that, all bets are off. Okay? So, there we go. But no, seriously, in all seriousness, there are some very good indicators for what looks like is shaping up to be a pretty brisk spring market. And we're going to talk about what some of those things are today. You have my outline. It's a lot of content that I'm going to really try to blow through quickly so that I can still make sure I preserve giving Holly some time. But I like to go into crazy land and talk about a lot of wild stuff, as those of you who've been here before know. Does everybody have a sheet now? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start off with this thing I talk about a lot called the three-headed monster. And I think it's just such a great way to start the conversation. Come on in. Because, well, does anyone feel a sense of discomfort, or things are unusual, or things are changing, or
Yeah.
does it feel more unusual than normal?
What's normal?
Okay. What's normal?
Good question.
Great question. And so I sort of say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time I say it in seriousness because I do believe the lens with which we have to look at the world is changing. I do believe that inherently, intrinsically, wholeheartedly. And I feel like I struggled for a while to figure out what this new lens is, because we sort of have our lenses and they're built by our experiences and whatever it might be. And then it changes, right? It's like that who moved my cheese concept or notion. And so I found myself sort of searching, and then one day, you know how you go into a bookstore and you just kind of, all of a sudden it pops off the shelf at you, and you're like, I don't know why I'm supposed to read that, but I'm going to read it. And then you read it and you're like, oh. And then it just continues to remain solid as you go forward as an appropriate lens with which to start to perceive and interpret the world that we're in. And so that book for me at the moment, and it hasn't changed in many months now, for those of you who've been in this class with me, is the book that is on the top of your outline, book by Thomas Friedman, Thank You for Being Late. And until everyone in this company has read it, I am going to continue to bang on this drum. Because it's painful for the first 2/3 of the book, I will not deny. He's an incredibly smart guy and profound, and it's just really interesting. The first 2/3 are painful because the change that we're going through are changes that we're going through that he talks about are, what would you say, Tammy? Historic. Mm-hmm. Historic. Unprecedented.
There's no frame of reference for it.
Unbelievable. Yeah, no frame of reference. And they're somewhat bone-chilling at times as well. So those three things, what he basically talks about in this book, I'll give a little bit of it away, is that we're in the middle of 3 accelerations. And those accelerations, it's like Gary's conversation about the hockey stick. It starts out sort of, and then it goes up, right? And in this book, he calls it Moore's Law, okay? And that's how the accelerations sort of build on top of each other. So those 3 accelerations, for those of you who know, what's one?
Technology.
Technology? Yes. Technology is a huge one. Globalization. Have you read the book?
No.
Nice, but you've heard me.
Well, you have it all written down right now.
Thank you!
I'm just waiting for you to blink so I can look down to get the third one.
some good leaders.
So globalization, climate change, and technology. Those are the three accelerations. And I guess what I would say to you is find a lens with which you're going to understand what's happening, and then continue to feed that on a consistent basis. And then let that inform your behaviors and your actions, is my feeling, after really kind of thinking this through on a regular basis. So that's sort of the background and the lens with which I want you to understand that I kind of move through this economic discussion that we have, because all of these factors affect each other. And you see this. I mean, just yesterday, Bloomberg posted an article about the impact climate change is going to have in terms of the cost of these disasters, that if we're denying them, seriously, these are hugely impacting real estate and people's lives. So these are important things that I think we have to have a context with which to understand. And so that's a really great book for gaining that understanding, and I highly recommend it. So if he sells a lot of books, I will take some of the credit. So highly recommend that. And he basically, at the end of it, the last third of the book, he's really basically talking about lean into it. It is what it is. It's not going to change, and there's opportunity. There will be winners and losers, but there's opportunity within that too. And so it's important to just get the right lens so that you then can see those opportunities, see the risks, rewards, challenges, and you can be my number one driving premise in terms of my hope for you understanding as we go through these changes is you still have such a huge role to play in our communities and in your spheres of influence as a fiduciary. And that's what this class hopefully is about, is deepening your capacity to serve as a fiduciary and get comfortable with that role. Because any of the information you get in here hopefully just helps you to deepen that skill level. And that's what I really, in terms of your profession in this industry, want to encourage, is developing those fiduciary skills so that you're really supporting clients and customers. They already know that technology can't do everything for them. They know this. And if you're not hearing them say that, then you might not be listening, and you might not actually be stepping into that fiduciary conversation. So that is really critical in my mind. So being learning-based, that's what we are. Thinking critically, and this is where it will lead you into this space, in this conversation. So sort of piggybacking on that three-headed monster concept is Gary Keller. No surprise. And he's read the book, by the way. Thank you for being late. It was on his suggested reading list. And actually, one of the things I have for you today is I have Gary's new suggested reading list. So if anyone wants this, I've printed copies of this for you today. So anything on that, I'm sure will be extraordinary. So Gary talks about, instead of calling it a three-headed monster, although that's my favorite thing to call it, he talks about the three shifts, okay? And the three shifts he's talking about are technology and data. And essentially that boils down to platform, okay, which is why he has built Command, is so that he can be in control, we can be in control of our data, our technology, and our platform. Because that's really essentially what it's going to boil down to, is the platforms. And then he talks about the economy, which I think ties into Thomas Friedman's sort of ideas, and then competition. And in our industry, many of you know that there's a lot of money flowing into our industry right now, trying to chase that end-to-end platform revolution and evolution of changing the way that consumers purchase and sell real estate. So it's fascinating. And so when you hear Gary talk, and I highly recommend that you spend some time listening to what he's saying about this, he interprets that for us. And basically, everything he says brings you back to this notion of fiduciary, in my opinion, okay? So he talks at great length about the difference between an agent-enabled, I love the word empowered, which is the word I've put in there, because sometimes I have a hard time understanding other people's philosophical concepts. Agent-enabled empowered tech, which I believe is really more the functionary side of things. Okay, that's opening the doors. Sure. For me, actually, it's one of the most challenging parts of our business is opening doors. I don't know why. But that's really the stuff that is going to be easy to be replaced. The World Economic Forum put together a study, and they said by 2025, 85% of what we do is going to be automated. Okay, so that's just a fact. That's where this Moore's law around technology is taking us, okay? That's what functionary looks like. All right, and then you offset that with Gary's notion of the tech-enabled or empowered agent. That's where you find your fiduciary space. That's where we as agents really know our value proposition is as a fiduciary to consumers and to homeowners, home investors, real estate investors, whomever our clientele may be, our friends, our family, and it's providing them with that fiduciary level service. And on that note, I do have a handout that I put together for a little talk I did with Holly's group. Thank you for having me, Holly. I did a presentation with them on exactly this topic, and I'm happy to give this out to you, but it goes more into depth on what that difference between a functionary and a fiduciary is. And actually, guess what? It's in license law. So it is an expectation. You are already empowered by your license to act as a fiduciary for your clients. So delving deeper into that and getting really clear about that being a part of your value proposition is going to be such an empowering thing for you, particularly in terms of how you manage getting paid what you feel you're worth. Okay? So this is a fun thing. If you want to have that, feel free to take a copy of that to
Can I back up for a second, Leanne?
chew on a little bit. Yeah, sure, David.
85% automated.
That's what the World Economic Forum says. Yeah. They did a study saying that by the year 2025, 85% of our tasks will be automated. Mm-hmm.
Realtors or
I
in
don't
our
believe
daily
that.
lives?
Generally, it was the general,
Okay.
I didn't read the study,
Why is that?
but it was a general sort of characterization.
Wouldn't surprise me.
And if you read Thank You for Being Late, you'll see how this is playing out in terms of the Moore's Law. I mean, even if you just think back to when we got our first bag phones.
Do I have to?
You know, I mean, I took my daughter to see Apollo 11 on Friday night.
That's good.
Now, do that. First of all, it's incredibly fascinating. And it's not dramatized. It's the real, actual, like if you were sitting there watching every news clip of what happened during that 2-week period, it's like all streamed together. But like there's this room full of computers with all these scientists, you know, helping these spaceships navigating to the moon and back, which is extraordinary. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, the equivalency of the computers in that room is probably the equivalent of an iPad
Right, yeah.
or your cell phone.
Right. It's unbelievable.
You know, but yet they still managed to get someone to the moon and back. So now what's possible? You know, and so that's what's coming into play, and that really is the driving notion behind what's being built with Kelly and KW Command. And it's powerful stuff, really powerful beyond what we can even really truly imagine. I'm still embracing the sort of the lens with which I've adopted through this book that I read, or this Thank You for Being Late, and trying to understand what that means for the world that we're in. And I want to invite you on that journey, because that's what we're on, is a journey to understanding, not only understanding, but helping other people understand this. We're leaders in our community. That's what fiduciaries are. And that's what our clients want us to be, because they still can't figure real estate out without us. They still can't
That's
do
my
it.
point, is I don't think, you know, I mean, we're still answering the 10,000 questions that we always had from every seller and every buyer. The questions are always the same.
And what's going to happen for us, because we get this difference between, you know, tech-enabled agents and agent-enabled tech, is we're going to be able to take the technology and empower ourselves to serve on a much higher fiduciary level. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Look at that smile.
This is where it gets fun. When you really get into this and you really understand it and you really embrace this lens and you say, okay, this is what's happening, and you stop fighting it. And you say, okay, this is what's happening. And you allow yourself to go there and embrace it and be part of this. Because some of the other statistics I'm going to share with you about the sweet spots in our market and where we're seeing homeownership growth, it's really critical. It's really critical that we go there because the demographics that are driving our markets now are demographics that we've never seen. You know, it's the young people, and they're adopting homeownership. They're the new household formation in our country, and it's a big deal. We're very fortunate to have this next generation coming up through, and they're going to demand it of us. And they want us to still be able to serve them as a fiduciary, but they want us to have our tech nailed. I can tell you that. They already know Zillow isn't doing it for them. They already know that, okay? Don't let anybody tell you anything different, because that's the other thing that happens is there's a lot of noise, right? I think there's a lot of noise. How do you sift through it? Coming to this class is a good start, I think. You know, Holly and I really work hard to try to help you sift through it and really decide what's important. Tammy.
Going back to, I'm starting to feel, even in the conversations with buyers, how climate change is impacting location. How do you feel it is impacting the fiduciary duty that we have for our clients and the climate change that we know is going to happen and the dialogue that needs to happen around that?
One of the things that's challenging is I haven't studied a lot of the scientific models, so there's a lot I sort of feel is going to happen. I had no idea what just happened out in the Midwest was going to happen. I had no idea what just happened in Mozambique was going to happen. We don't really know what's going to happen, and so I think that's challenging. And I'm finding that the clients that I'm talking to, they just sort of glaze over. I mean, they really do. So we may, as leaders in our communities, we may be out in front of some of this stuff. And that is often the case. And so I think you just, as consumers of information, you have to choose what you're consuming. And I think you have to decide what you're going to be really informed and educated about. And I think, I think it's okay to sprinkle a little bit of some of those cautionary pieces. And maybe it's really just, what's going to happen with flood insurance. Maybe it's asking some of those questions. Maybe that's the best way to approach it right now as fiduciaries, is at least making sure we're questioning some of the decision making. But I'll tell you, we had our best ever in history waterfront year in Maine last year.
Oh, really?
Best ever. 2018. And it just... Okay, stay on track. So Gary very much gets this, essentially, is what I want to say. And he's sharing with us what he feels is that three-headed monster within our industry. And he's providing us a path to respond, react, participate, be a part of it. So I want to really encourage you to get in that space where you're carving out time to embrace and adopt KW Command, get your database in there. They're going to want this. They're going to want what it has to offer. And you're going to want it too. There's going to be a learning curve, but there's a learning curve with all of this, frankly. And I think as much as you can embrace it and jump into it, it's only going to benefit you. Okay, now on to the economy. So, a couple other reminders, and I'm probably not going to stop talking about this until everybody in the company has watched these videos. Gary, on October 26th of 2018, I've watched this video at least 4 times now. I know I'm a nerd, okay? You gotta watch it, The Tech Revolution. This is where he explains all of this. It is 3.5 hours, but it can be playing in the background. You can play it on your phone when you're in the car instead of a podcast, although some podcasts are fabulous. But seriously, you gotta listen to that. It so tells you, it explains to you, you won't look at me so much like I'm crazy after you watch this, okay? Because he explains this Moore's Law and the hockey stick and the concept of how medicine is gonna change. And I'll tell you, talking to my 12-year-old daughter, who just got access to a computer this year, the stuff that comes out of her mouth is completely in line with what I'm talking about. And I'm just like, whoa, it's wild. And we gotta get there. We've gotta get ourselves there, okay? The other thing is Gary Keller's vision speech from 2019, Family Reunion. It's another long one, but it's always one of my favorite things. All of the slides are online, available to you as KW Associates to download and incorporate into your presentations for your clients. So you need that stuff. It's like housing affordability, homeownership rates, interest rate, trending. It's just amazing economic data, better than I could ever even dream of delivering to you. So highly recommend that. Also on merida.org, they actually post all the videos and the PowerPoints from their forecasting event in January. And so that's another excellent resource. I particularly love Karen Rich's retail report because it just gives you such insight into our economy in Maine. So highly recommend those things. So on that note, let's listen to what Lawrence Yun has to say this month, which is a little different than he had to say last month, which I think is fun. Maybe.
Speak up, Lawrence. I had that problem too when I found that the right side of my palm was on the pad.
You got it. Maybe you can have mine. See if you have volume next.
If he doesn't want to go into the death spiral. Yeah, Okay, well, we might not be listening to Lawrence soon today. Sorry, guys.
Well, let's play with that, you keep talking, let's see if I can get it back for you.
You're the best, Holly.
Well, we'll see how this goes.
Lawrence Young is much more positive this month. And for those of you who were here last month, we were just coming out of the government shutdown last month when we did our economic update. And so there was some serious shifting in the economic updates and the numbers. So some of the key figures that he talks about at length are pending home sales, rebounded strongly in January, up 4.6%. So that's really great to see. All 4 major regions saw growth, including a larger surge in the South. That's existing home sales. Then 3 of the 4 major US regions saw sales gains, while the Northeast remained unchanged from last month, and that's up 11.8%. So that's a really good sign. The reason the Northeast wasn't up?
It was already hot.
We had a very snowy season. Yeah.
Ice.
So that would be pretty typical. So my suspicion is that we now have pent-up demand. Is anybody feeling it in the last week or 2?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So there's your answer. So we are starting to see the spring come into full experience right now, which is really good. He was actually pretty giddy in terms of his reaction. Yeah. Compared to last month, it's a really interesting time right now to just listen. You know, through the noise, you can always hear some sort of consistent messages, and he's still very cautious, but so happy that it's come back for the spring. Because we've been off a few cliffs before, right? And there are starting to be some signs. So I'm gonna flip you fast forward quickly to the back page, and then I'm gonna come back to this other notion I wanted to chat with you about in a minute. This is what I want to just sort of have in your mind about going forward. I had this great article, and I want to steer you to this additional resource. Holly turned me on to it, actually. It's CoreLogic. CoreLogic used to be our vendor for our MLS. CoreLogic puts out a market pulse. I want to encourage you to go to their website and to find it. It's called the Market Pulse, and this is from March 2019. It's really actually a wonderful document. And so they have access to, they're the largest data corporation in terms of real estate collection through appraisal sources, realtor sources. So they have a lot of data, and they crunch it out, and they even have Schiller, I believe, on their staff, who's a prominent economist in terms of housing. So this I want to just direct you to as a great resource for some economic data. So some things that I thought were the most notable was they had a little conversation, this one article by Ralph McLaughlin, and even though we get really nervous about recessions, right? Are we hearing that word a lot in the economy right now?
Only by people that are trying to boost their ratings on television.
Okay,
That's just not happening.
okay, it could be, fair enough. And there's,
steady development in the
don't touch.
The volume, we're just gonna touch the volume.
Whoops.
I don't know where you went, did you?
I didn't touch anything.
I did track down someone to come try to find Anthony.
You're the best. Okay, we ready for Lawrence?
Hi, I'm Quentin Simmons with the National Association of Realtors Communications Department, and I'm with NAR's Chief Economist, Lawrence Young. Lawrence, the pending home sales index increased 4.6%, a welcoming sign that buyers are returning. What do you attribute that to?
First, 4% increase, or better than 4% increase. These are sizable. So very good sign that buyers are coming back just in time for the spring buying season. No doubt that low mortgage rates are contributing to this. Back late last year, mortgage rate had been 5% or a little above 5. Now it is at 4.5%, or some people can get it at 4.3% mortgage rates. This 50 basis point or more change in mortgage rate generally translates into about $80 per month saving for the same home. So low mortgage rates, without a doubt, is contributing to the buyers suddenly coming back to the market.
You say that lower mortgage rates helped. Do you expect steady rates for the remainder of the year?
The Federal Reserve has indicated that they want to be patient, and the way I interpret that is that there will be no further increase in interest rates in 2019, which means that mortgage rates should remain steady. Another factor that can boost mortgage rate is inflation, but there is no inflation, and hence I feel comfortable that mortgage rate will be under 5% for essentially all of the year or most parts of the year. Another thing that is helping for home buyers is that 2019 will be the first time in a long time where people's income growth will actually be higher than home price growth. So another beneficial factor for home buyers.
There are concerns of rising default when it comes to car loans and student loans. How about mortgage debt? How's that performing?
So the auto loan default rate has certainly been rising recently. One looks deeper into the data. Essentially, they are trying to enlarge the pool of people who can take out auto loans, essentially going out enlarging the subprime pool. Fortunately for the housing market, we don't have the subprime lending. 10 years ago, big mistake. There is no repeat of that. Mortgage default rates currently are at historic low. Housing market is performing well. Furthermore, because of the rise in real estate value, without a commensurate increase in mortgage balance, the overall wealth situation for homeowners are very solid. Homeowners in a very healthy, firm ground.
The outlook for the year improved a bit in your latest forecast. What are the reasons for that?
So the expectation of steady mortgage rates, the economy is continuing to generate jobs. So I boost the forecast a notch. So initially, I have called for 2% decline in overall home sales. Now I believe it's going to be only 1% decline. Essentially a steady market, very moderate increase in home prices, a very healthy, steady development in the housing market.
So this is where you can find this. Does anybody ever go to NAR's website? The link is right on this page. There's slides right up to date on this that you can use with your clients. So please, that's a fabulous resource, and his videos are actually really helpful. So that's good information.
How often
So
does he update it?
monthly, for the most part, and they're usually in this section. In another week, there'll actually be even more data on this website. So
Leanne, I mean, this is a change from what he was saying before, because I remember he was
a little freaked out.
Prognosticating that we're looking at maybe 5.2% by the end of the year, and it's going to stay on. Now he's saying under 5.
Well, let's talk about what's happened. Did anyone see 60 Minutes with Jerome Powell? So Jerome Powell was on 60 Minutes 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Look it up on YouTube and watch it. It's about a 15, 16-minute snippet. And I'll tell you, in these crazy times, we have a lot of crazy stuff going on right now. I was like, wow, okay, this guy's kind of got it, right? So that's interesting. But he basically talked about the fact that he's been humbled in this position, very big position that he has to be in charge of the Fed. And that essentially they're watching all this stuff really closely. And the kind of stuff that they watch really to some degree confounds me, which is why I incorporated in here something to share with you guys about that we're hearing a little bit about in the noise that's out there right now, which is the flattening yield curve. So I don't know if you guys all understand that, but I didn't. So there's signs of it starting to invert, which a lot of economists get nervous about. So I'm going to explain that a little bit today and give you a little bit more understanding of that. So they're watching all this stuff, and basically he's changed his whole approach. And he said interest rates are going to stay low. So now that's enabled Lawrence Yun to shift his forecast. And they know housing is one way to keep an otherwise challenging economy. I mean, there's a lot of positives in the economy, like you say, but it's challenging to maintain certain levels of growth.
So I'm trying to remember, yesterday I was watching some of the financials, and they're saying not only is it unlikely they're going to raise interest rates again this year, but they may even cut them. So
they're going to hold on to that as a tool.
Right.
Okay, so that's one of the tools in their bag of tools. And that's another thing to just sort of pay attention to as you're trying to understand monetary policy, is what are the tools that the Feds have in their bag. We all know what they used in 2008, right? Who remembers? David.
Lots of money pumped into the economy.
They did that.
They did TARP.
Yep, they did TARP.
That was huge.
Yep.
TARP 2.
And then they also did a first-time homebuyer tax credit.
That was awesome.
And
I know
some
it
people,
wasn't, but it was.
remember that? That was huge
yeah.
for us because
Yeah.
the whole bottom fell out. Okay? And actually the first little note that I make here on page 5 of your sheets, which is the last page, is most past recessions, house prices still gained, except in 2008. We saw a 19.7% drop. But in many recessions, like the dot-com recession, things still continue to grow in terms of homeownership. And that last slide that Lawrence Young shows us in terms of debt burden on housing and values, we're still in pretty safe territory. I got a little panicked actually a few weeks ago because I got an email from a lender saying that they had started to do no-doc loans again. And I was like, blah, why are we doing this? You know, but it sounds like we have a bigger issue with that in the car industry. And if you read into that and you couple technology and the resource issues that we have, you know, I think we're starting to see signs of maybe a shift into more of a sharing economy. That's just one little thing I want to throw out there in my crazy land of things that I think about. But that's, you know, Elon Musk, one of the things he said when he invented the Model X car was it was ahead of its time. And the reason why is because it's driverless, it's meant to essentially be a driverless taxi. Yeah, so this is the stuff that's coming, in my opinion. So, the next little bullet is inventory is still not keeping up with demand. Today, 15.7 homes per 1,000 is up slightly from a record low of 14.9 in December 2017. New household formation. This is really fascinating. And this is why it's so important that we really embrace this technology and adopt this technology. Because these youngsters that we've got coming up, I can't believe I'm even saying that. I've always felt like a youngster, but I'm admitting that I'm really not so much anymore. 46% of the US population under 35, there's going to remain upward pressure on the housing market, they project, till about 2040. This is Ralph McLaughlin with CoreLogic. I just love this sort of projecting because demographics do play a huge role in the economy. One of my favorite economists for years was Harry Dent, and he wrote a book called The Roaring 2000s. And just, it was all really essentially based on demographics. Now he studies a bunch of other things, but demographics can tell us a lot. And there's a lot to be gained from learning about that demographic and what they're going to provide in terms of opportunities for our housing market. Homeownership rate increase to 64.8%. That's the 8th consecutive quarter of year-over-year increase. And really, it's that 20 to 44 age group they've increased their homeownership in their household formation 36 to 60%. In their 4th quarter of 2018, 1.7 million new owner households formed. That means rentals decreased, so there's been a shift from renting to owning. So that's really good news. I love that news. Coupled with what Lawrence Young is talking about with the interest rates being so low. And I'll give you a little display. So that was all from Ralph McLaughlin's article in the CoreLogic Market Pulse. So for anybody watching, please look that up. Thank you, Holly, for sending that to me. That CoreLogic report is so fun. I loved it. Affordability is key. In 2006, this is kind of fun. I love how they spun this. 2006 mortgage interest rate of 6.7%. So we thought 2006 was so great, but look at that interest rate. It's still 2 points higher than what Lawrence Young, and sometimes even more, because he said you can maybe even get 4.3, and it might even go lower. You're right. And a median sales price of $247, which is what it was back then in today's dollars, given inflation adjustment. An average mortgage payment was about $1,275 a month. That doesn't include insurance and taxes. Versus today in 2018, you have 4.6% interest rate and a median sales price of about $220, average mortgage payments of $904 today. And then 2019, what they're forecasting is it's going to be about $935, which is really very affordable compared to 2006. So that is hardly a harbinger of trouble in the housing market, particularly when you couple it with the defaults, the debt burdens, and those things. So we don't have the same kinds of things that were happening back in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2003, those years. So that's kind of cool news. So that's what really gives me great confidence that we're gonna have a great spring. So it's a good time to do bold and shake the bushes. But again, coming back to this national disaster thing, I mean, this is gonna start showing up. One of the places where there are a lot of mortgage defaults happening is in the panhandle of Florida. The devastation from the storm there, people are not paying their mortgages. they were not insured properly. So that's another thing we can encourage as fiduciaries to our clients, is to really make sure you're insured properly. Some of the windstorms we've been having here and the trees, most of my clients now, they're looking at houses, it's amazing. The ones that don't gloss over, and they're not even really talking necessarily about climate change, but they're looking at all the big trees around the house. And that's probably the number one referral I'm making, is to a good tree person to come and remove, especially the great big huge pine trees. So that's an area where we're able to provide some support, okay? And then making sure people are properly insured, making sure they understand the complexities of moisture in the homes. That's a bigger issue now, because we're tightening up our homes, or making them more efficient, because it's expensive to use fossil fuels. You know, so all of these things are things that I think are really relevant to us here. This is another really cool thing that still, I just have to kind of leave this little note, because there are people that are concerned. The IMF managing director, who actually happens to be a woman, what's her name? It's on yours, it's not on mine. Christine Lagarde. On NPR Marketplace, she suggests that tensions with China and the US, although I did hear that we are close to an agreement. Did anybody else hear that?
Well, we've been hearing that for months, but.
True. So, anyway, tensions between China and the US, and I did actually see something the other day too about China just barely escaping deflation. So the slowdown in China is a significant issue for the global economy. Significant issue that many, many economists outside of the US and inside the US are really looking at and concerned about. Heavy levels of debt, although I'm not going to get too much into that. Accelerated slowdown of China, Brexit, geopolitical risks. Although Brexit, maybe some things are starting to settle down there. Maybe there's significant geopolitical risks, climate disasters. All of this could trigger a recession. So these are just things to kind of pay attention to. The slowdown is already happening, especially given what's going on in China. One thing, I took a great course on statistics, and here's the link on your sheet through FlexMLS. Highly recommend you take that. That will help you really learn how to navigate the search criteria around forming statistical reports that are more specific, more hyper-local for your clientele in their neighborhoods, until we get all of our Command and Kelly operating, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be hyper-local. These are great ways to get that information for your clients. So let's go back to page, I wanted to give everybody kind of a fun little discussion about the flattening yield curve. Who feels really good about their knowledge of the flattening yield curve? I'm going to keep studying it. I'll tell you that right now. I'm going to keep studying it.
No one really knows the future. But the flattening yield curve is the pull between people in charge, policy-wise, and people in charge of people's money. The people in charge of other people's money is the long end of the yield curve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the smartest humans on the planet, the bond market. You know,
Are they?
The drug companies
Never heard them described that way.
Well,
I've met a bond trader once.
people that know what is about to happen can see it. It's far bigger than the stock market, the bond market. Okay, and then you have policymakers who are reacting to every tweet and headline in the newspaper, and they are controlling the short end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that it's tough for you to stand there and say this is or this will, is because you don't know how that politician's going to react, and you don't know how the market's going to react to whatever event, as Lagarde says.
Right.
So it's really hard to look at that and say, 3 months from now, this is where we'll be. Because all the stuff you have on here doesn't account for the fact that the curve just fell in the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
I think
Inverted.
Here, no, it didn't invert. It's all the rates started to drop again. The long rate. So
It inverted on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason you had the big sell-off
parts
on
of
Friday.
it, but it's still, the guy goes on TV and says, I'm not going to raise short-term interest rates. So that'll settle
So that would be
down.
Jerome Powell.
Yeah.
Right.
So the yield spread is the gap between short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates. right?
Mm-hmm.
And they
our rate
should,
is the 10-year, is the rate that we should be
Up to the 10
looking
year.
about, right?
yes, they do like to study between, what is it, the 2 and the 10?
Right.
And they measure that in terms of what that spread is. And they like it to be higher on the 10-year and lower on the,
On the 2-year.
On the
and
2-year.
lower on the 6-month and so forth. It should be a positively sloped curve.
right. And so what they say is as that yield spread on the 10-year starts to level out or flatten, it could be an indicator that there's gonna be less investment in business, less lending to businesses. And that is one of the things that we saw happen in the recession in 2008, is it was very difficult for businesses to get money, okay? So it's important to know and to just understand it in terms of its relationship to the flow of money, I think. And so this is an article that I've given to you. If you read it 6 times like I did, you might have a better understanding of it. But it is a fascinating thing. And there's also in this article, there's historical references for when a recession did or didn't show up in terms of the yield spread. So I think I think you're right, it is way bigger than the stock market, but it's a whole other world that hides behind economic drivers in our world. And I think I want you to be really educated about a lot of this stuff so that when you're hearing it and you're seeing it, you have a better understanding of what impact it may or may not have. So here's a little primer for you. I hope you enjoy it. Holly, the show is yours.
The dramatic lead-in, I love it. We've solved our current tech problems. So it's a little weird. I can't see on this screen. I can only see on that screen. So bear with me. So these slides, except for the last one we'll be showing today. Oh no, it's locking up on me right now. Oh my God. This is great. Had to call my assistant twice to have her track down Anthony.
I know what I've found, Leanne, over the years is, paying sort of peripheral attention to the stock and bond markets and what the Fed does and stuff like that is, unless you're really an insider, it's easy to be way out of your depth.
It is. It totally is. And I definitely am not advocating that we try to figure it all out. But I think I think some of these concepts we have to grab onto and chew a little bit. I feel that way. Otherwise, I feel like, what is this yield spread premium? What is the bond market? What are these things and how do they somewhat play together? And I think just to the degree that we can understand how it affects the flow of money and our people's capacity to get loans, as well as businesses, and keep the engine of the economy moving, that's what I kind of look for, is what are those connections that are relevant? Because some of it feels so irrelevant, and unimportant. Another thing I did pull for you guys too is the Housing Affordability Index, which I think is really fun, because I think particularly one of the things that you'll hear, or maybe, I don't know, I should ask you, are you hearing, well, the housing market's so hot, it's so inflated, are we still hearing a lot of that?
You'll believe this, but
Yeah, what was our number? Our recent numbers in Greater Portland were like San Francisco numbers as far as affordability. Isn't that what we heard last time? The affordability in Greater Portland was really tough.
I think, we were on that path in terms of our average sales prices, and with the interest rates, that's creating an offset. Okay?
Until Anthony gets here, I'm going to go offline on the
Okay.
paper version. So this is going to be would be the last slide. And I'm not including it in the presentation, but I want to talk to you about it. So I'm a big, I say everything I learn on Facebook, and we all know that we have to interpret what we learn on Facebook. It's the truth. So another, to have critical thinking. So this is sort of Leanne's point about when we start doing micro experimentation. So I saw the Portland Condo Report, and it's put out by another broker over at Vitalius, and I thought, oh, well, this is really fascinating. And I'm also a big sucker like graphics like this. I'm like, oh, this is really cool information. And so you can find it on Facebook. There's a lot of value to it. But then I went to talk to Sandra Tosnari, who works for me and keeps me in line. And I said, what can I do with this for Economic Update? And she's like, well, where'd the information come from? I'm like, well, I don't know. I read the whole report. It doesn't say how it's gathered. She says, do you think it's, and of course she's leading me, is it from MLS? What are the criteria? And what I wanted to share with you today is when you start thinking about how you do things, I started looking at this, because this is a Portland condo report. And it's talking about citywide stats between 2017 and 2018. It's talking about on peninsula versus off peninsula. And I'm really liking all this information, thinking this is really sort of fascinating. On peninsula, average sales price 401, off peninsula 234. And so I wanted to take this information and I went to the MLS to verify some of it. And I couldn't verify all of it because I actually didn't know the criteria. But it made me start to think in doing this. If I was saying Portland, condos, and I was trying to do a study. Right? And if you just went and you put in Portland as your search criteria, Portland, which is going to be really bad sketching, right? Portland shows up. So does Peaks. So the islands show up. They show up if you just put in city, right? So you don't do a map view. Then you're having condos that are out on Great Diamond, right? Throwing off your statistics. So yeah, that's not, and then I thought, where is the peninsula? Where do we draw that line? Right? Because I used to search things by zip code, but we're over here. Right? We are the same zip code as the West End. Yeah, right. This is
That's supposed to
Anthony,
be
I'm
the
all
law.
locked up again. I can't get my
Gotcha.
reports started. So I won't say like throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we want to think about these things. We really want to dig down. For other people, of course, when we're just sharing this, if you're sharing with your clients, is this right? You might want to verify it. Drill down and then think about, is average versus median a better way to look at things? One of the things that this report talks about is existing condos versus new condos. Well, how would you really define that? Is an existing condo that's finished in 2015 but sold in 2016, is it existing, or is it, is it how do you find these? How do you drill down this information? So not to not do it, because I think that it's useful information, and if you generated some kind of report like this for your clients, this is that kind of hyper-local stuff. It wouldn't take that much to do, but then there's also useful information about Portland municipal issues to watch. So I think we can definitely learn from our colleagues, but let's just be really cautious. And, as Sandra likes to tell me what's legal all the time, you have to talk about where you get your information from. You have to say you got it from the MLS. You really should be defining your search criteria in order to do it. So that was my end note. Can you make it play?
Which slide, the video?
Yeah, no, it's just his slides. I couldn't get him to move. And it completely locked up on me. Okay.
I don't know where you were.
Yeah, I was nowhere. I was at the beginning.
Just use the arrows.
You're somewhere, Holly.
Okay. All right.
The yellow brick road.
So everything except the last slide you'll see here is going to be on this. So the end of the month, different reports come out about the previous month. So yes, in March we're going to talk about February. And I'll go through these pretty quickly. You can stop and ask questions. The median sales price, it's always interesting to see West, sweep around the country, but then also to see that we have 690,000 sales in the Northeast. And everyone else, South is 2.39 million. Everyone else is over a million. The housing snapshot was like, well, that's not very interesting, except month over month was up 11.8%, year over year down 1.8%. The inventory is not doing anything dramatic. The median sales price year over year, we're still seeing that sales price increase. National home sales, the sales of the condos remain the same. Sales of single families went from 4.36 million in January to 4.94 million in February. I don't know about you, my February sucked. I was not in keeping with the rest of the nation. We had a terrible month. And I think weather and other things impacted us. The Maine, year over year, number of units, look at that, statewide down 10% in unit sales. Median price up 5% statewide. But again, when we go to these, like, where are we segmented? York was up 7% and Cumberland County was only up 0.61%. The South is doing well, but then there's Androscoggin, and then good old Saginaw, they went up, sold 2 more houses. But then had they got a good price jump because there was only 2 more things available. So February, single family homes, basically it's the same. The price rose compared to 2018. This is again the whole state. And then I do go through some of the slides Leanne was talking about from National Association of Realtors, and I look for something that's of interest, and this one was of definite interest to me. What you're seeing in the different colors is you're seeing the housing supply at the national level. And you're seeing the national months is the blue. It's it's following the red. The red is the single family month supply, and the green is the condos. The green is on a different trajectory, right? Its housing supply right now is going up. Not a good sign for condos. And it's again one of those things. Condo builders, it's often with new construction, a lagging indicator, not a leading. Everybody's jumping on until they realize there's too much inventory. We've created too much neglect. Is that possibly happening? It could be. And then regional statistics. I think for a lot of us, it's always worthwhile to talk to people who watch the news. Like my dad watches the news. He watches Fox News, so I won't offer any commentary on that other than the world's going to end all the time, and it's my fault. But when people listen to the news and they think the national is everything. But look at what's interesting to me. Change it, percent of sales from a year ago. Look out west. It's all down, right? Northeast, we're still up. It's oftentimes, and those who've been in real estate a long time, we see these things that the real estate comes from the west and moves over here, and we're insulated for a long time, and we're
That's the weather
educated.
that's out there.
Maybe that's impacting on real estate.
I'd say taxes too.
Yeah. And then Chelsea made that commentary, do you trust everything you hear? I wasn't meaning to slam Elise's report, but again, just, when we read these things, and then we are the interpreters, we are the local economists. How are we presenting information? What are we using statistically? Are we using enough information that it's relevant, that it's not, oh my God, Saginaw County is really driving the world. Maybe it is in Saginaw, right? That's the reality of it. Like, how does it frame the rest of Maine? What are we seeing as the trend lines? So that Leanne usually has more to say, so I'm usually like
I can say
quick
a lot
with my
more.
stuff. Yeah, you can add to that, or we can have a question. Yeah.
A couple questions. Do we know anything about new homes, what permits are being applied for, and the driving of the new construction? Because that's always kind of that indicator. And I know it's about a year. Are you hearing about a year behind? Are your builders about a year or so, or?
It's not meeting the demand.
Right, okay.
And we're not building enough. But at the
Right.
same time, it's so local is what I'm finding. And so like in Manhattan, their condo market has been declining for the past 5 years in a row.
Yeah.
And so there's some real trouble, I believe, in Manhattan, in terms of the acceleration in pricing and in values, and not being able to sustain that. But there really isn't enough construction to keep up with the demand. But I also think part of what might be happening is a shift in how people want to live. I think there's a lot of other things changing. When you see developments like Rock Row being proposed in Westbrook, mixed use, creating basically a town center in the middle of nowhere, but near everything, is kind of interesting.
If you haven't Googled it's amazing what they're planning there. What that is. And then there was an article in the Wall Street Journal I haven't read yet on big houses. I have a house closing Friday, and the biggest challenge was on the ocean, beautiful house, perfect condition. It was 6,000 square feet, and I knew going in, I was like, this is going to be a fight all day long. People were overwhelmed by the size, the idea of maintaining something that size, heating something that size. It's just this tipping point, and you can do searches like that. If you find a house and you're feeling that way, you can go into the MLS statistically and you can watch that video. And I'll do a lesson next time, and you could put in the square footage above grade, and you could find out what happens there. I've found that it starts pushing back on the price when I've done these kinds of studies.
Well, especially if they need some painting. I showed one in Falmouth this weekend that was $550. Same thing, huge house. And I think, one of the things we can do too as fiduciaries is to feel those nuances, because we feel them more than anybody else, because we get the feedback from the buyers directly in the field. And so we kind of know what those trends are. And I think that's a fun thing that we'll talk more about too in this class, is the demographics, and really understanding that 20 to 44 buyer, because that's what's really going to shape the market going forward. How do they want to live? And are towns flexible and open to this notion of not just these suburban subdivisions with these houses on an acre that are 6,000 square feet? What can they do to reinvigorate that? Those are, I think, some of the conversations that are coming. because I think we need to be wiser with the resources we have and the space we have, because, you know, it's starting to get scarce, because, and it's showing up in the expense, because it's very expensive to build. It's very expensive to build. It's difficult. The market doesn't actually support necessarily the cost to build always.
And that's why nothing's been, you know, everything's like 500,000. Feels like Greater Portland, you know, it's very hard to, and there would be all day long, imagine if you could build houses for 300 or 275.
Right, or even 350, yeah, absolutely. That would feed into that first time home buyer household formation, which is a huge segment of the market.
Not counting land, what's the cost to build now per square foot?
I think Leanne's more on top of that, right?
Yeah, I mean,
what do you want for luxuries in it?
it really does, and I think, you know, what you want for automation and what you want for your heating and cooling systems and all of that stuff. But there's some great tax incentives to take advantage of in terms of green building. And actually, I'm doing a panel in April down at the Cloud co-working space. I'll tell you when it is. And it's gonna be on green construction. With Michael Sosnowski is putting it on. It's
I met with a builder recently, and you know, talking about a $400,000 price point house, and it was like $200 a square foot.
it's about 200, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's plus or minus anywhere
Yeah.
from 4 to 6. You're looking at 2.25. But it's so hard to find skilled workers and contractors
That's the
and
problem,
building
yeah.
costs, and these tariffs have driven up wood prices, and it's nuts. You can't afford to build. I mean, you can buy for less, and then the inventory's so short that.
It's one of the interesting nuances of what we've been through the last 20 years, is there was a time when it was cheaper to build.
Right.
There have been times. That is really not much.
On the other end of it, we have such an older community in Maine, and Jay and I will door knock and talk to all these people who want to downsize, but not necessarily downgrading price. So you would look at $500,000 homes, and they're all $4,000 or $5,000 square, 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. You know, you can't find anything that's 1,500, a 2-bedroom ranch that's in a nice area, worth a lot of money, really nice amenities, water views, anything like that. Everything's huge.
Yeah,
So you can't find anything to downgrade, downsize into that's high end.
I think we've got some changes that are gonna be happening. You know, and what do we do with those big houses? You know, I mean, that's a real fun thing to brainstorm with our seller clients. You know, that's where we have a real fiduciary opportunity, is to try to help them figure that out.
We have hostels coming.
Airbnb.
I don't know about that, but, you know, yeah, I mean.
Well, it's just creative brainstorming.
Yeah.
With them.
And I think this is the fun that we get to have every month in this class, is trying to spark those creative juices and get you thinking about those opportunities and seeing things through a lens that's relevant.
Yep.
I think.
Yeah, but just to piggyback on the building itself is not the only cost here.
No.
So, do you have to
Land
build
costs.
the land cost, the well, the
Permitting.
septic,
Impact
the
fees.
Clearing the
sidewalks,
wall.
what kind of road, does it need a driveway, right-of-ways, variances, all of these other components, underground versus above-ground electrical. We need a land class.
And that $200 a square foot would cover everything. A contractor from day one clearing the lot, pouring
Just
the
not only that,
foundation,
yeah.
every
It's just-
aspect, well, septic,
Yeah.
roughly $200 a
Drainage.
square foot.
How far back does it need to be set back?
Right, all your zoning.
Yeah,
they
it's
handle-
it's fun and messy. It's
Well, I think too, one of the things I'm finding is that towns aren't necessarily in a space where they're understanding that it's a time of innovation in terms of housing and zoning. That's one of the things I'm definitely finding.
sometimes.
Yeah, it seems
Yeah,
very.
some are,
Some aren't so much.
Yeah.
They need to update some of their zoning information in order to accommodate new building.
Well, and, how do people wanna live? How do we wanna live nowadays? I'm seeing some shifts, and Maine has been shifting into more of that downtown lifestyle. And we don't,
Less maintenance, smaller buildings,
Yeah.
older.
energy efficient, and.
Walkability. That's the big driver.
Yeah.
And then we have the tiny house movement going on in the other rural areas.
That's the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
Right.
we do.
Yeah, that
It's
Brunswick
completely changing everything.
situation's interesting.
Yeah.
with putting the tiny homes in the mobile home park.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, mobile homes were the number one sale. What was it I reported in January? They were like the number one sale in 2018. Yeah.
Mobile homes?
Mobile homes.
Was it
Well,
to get,
it was
to
a-
acquire the land though?
It was up 19%.
Okay.
Wow.
Mobile home sales were up 19%.
Do we know if it was was it the mobile home or the land and the mobile home?
It was the mobile home category in MLS.
Okay, I'm just wondering if they were
Personal property
acquiring
or
the land
yeah.
and removing the mobile home.
Right.
And hopefully upgrading.
I know there's a lot of builders now, like Schiavi Homes and that kind of, they're considered mobile, but that are building, manufactured homes, I don't know if that's,
Yeah.
that's
Not
part
our
of it.
single and double wide.
Right,
Like we used to,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's,
Because
they're
they're
pretty
cheaper,
part of it.
cheaper labor
Right.
to build.
Well, and we had a fun economic update where I went through like the 3D printing and, combustion engines being replaced with batteries. I mean, there's some really innovative stuff happening, that will start to
Yeah.
show up.
How about the rental market? I know we gotta go, but I'm just, do we have stats that we
We don't have a
acquire on the flats?
we don't
at all?
have,
But I
no.
know they used to do the reports, at least you used to be able to get into, yeah, it was on the big long report for buyers, anytime you had a specific home.
In CoreLogic and Matrix?
Yes.
Oh, because they were incorporating
They
national
were
data?
incorporating all of that, and so you could
Oh.
always look to see what a one-bedroom home would be rented for, a two-bedroom home, and so you could get a range, at least, an idea. So I didn't know if we.
I don't think
There
we have any
isn't
access
a
to rental
way
data
to-
that I know of.
No.
Yeah.
I wonder
It's
if
very
Southern-
anecdotal.
Southern Maine Landlord Association, because we don't have
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say,
consolidated.
get Rick's report, Rick
Yeah.
Vitale's report from the Southern Maine Landlords Association.
Should be on that Marita thing online then, Tammy.
Okay.
He did
Yeah.
a little bit on that, on the Marita, mostly multifamilies, but I don't know if he talked too much about rentals this year, in terms of, maybe a little bit, yeah.
And Leanne, you don't know anything more about rent,
Control.
thank you. It's like stabilize, no, control. That is
That's
thrown out,
one way to
right?
get more rentals
far.
built.
Okay. We don't project to see that coming about again this year, do we? In the-
I don't even dare say anything.
Okay.
Who knows?
Thank you.
So, we can take a look and try to see if we can find rental data going forward.
It would just be.
Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for
Thank you for
spending
collecting
the
all that.
time and
Okay.
Yes.
if you're